Good evening and welcome. Tonight, we turn our gaze toward one of the most enduring and curious images in all of folklore. Why do witches fly on broomsticks? Out of all the objects in a household, how did the broom become the chosen vessel for magic and flight? Was it merely a strange whim of the imagination? Or does it stem from something far more ancient and visceral? In this story, we will sift through medieval beliefs, herbal folklore, and the misinterpreted history that slowly elevated a common cleaning tool into a symbol of the supernatural. We'll see how fear and rumor combine to create the silhouette we still recognize today soaring across a moonlit sky. Curious to know, where in the world are you listening from? And what is the hour for you? Whether you are settling in for the night or simply seeking an answer to one of history's strangest questions, thank you for being here. Let us begin. A woman kneels on a stone floor, dragging a bundle of twigs across the sand. The fire has burned down to embers, and smoke clings to the rafters. A child watches her work from a wooden bench, legs swinging, eyes following the head of the broom as it scrapes the joints between the stones. Every pass gathers ash, straw, and the black crumbs of yesterday's meal. She sweeps the debris into a wooden tray and carries it outside. The day continues its rhythm. Bread must be formed. Water must be carried. The pot must be scrubbed. In such places, over centuries, the broom earned its place as a tool that touches every hour. A broom begins with the plants that grow on stubborn soil: heather, birch, straw, or reeds, or whatever is nearby and plentiful. A stick for the handle, a bundle for the head, twine, a strip of bark, or a leather strap to pull it all tight. Hands do the work, pinching and twisting until the bundle takes shape. The finished broom is leaned against the door, ready for the next spill, the next track of mud, the next drift of ash. Men use brooms too. They sweep barns, clear threshing floors, and tidy workshops. However, inside the home, the broom is tied most closely to women's work. Domestic life requires constant attention. The floor becomes foul quickly when animals share the room with people, when rain brings clay into the doorway, and when straw bedding falls apart. Cleaning becomes a routine, and routine becomes identity. A woman with a broom in her hand looks like the personification of order. Neighbors notice, they comment, they judge. In tight-knit communities, small habits become public property. The broom also turns into a marker. A tool left in a certain place tells a story. A broom leaned against a doorway might signal that someone has left. A broom placed by a wall shows the task is finished and the house is ready for guests. In some communities, the broom takes on ceremonial weight. Couples jump over it in wedding customs meant to mark a threshold. These actions remain physical. The broom moves dust. Feet lift over the handle. Memory preserves it. This overlapping of daily life and ceremony gives the broom its first shadow. Any object used around thresholds, doors, hearths, and beds gathers stories. These are the places where people are born, fed, fall ill, and are buried. The broom stands at the entrance where strangers knock. It leans by the fire where food is prepared. It touches the floor where children crawl. If a family believes in charms, the broom becomes part of that practical magic, hung to ward off pests or laid across a doorway to keep a child from wandering. None of this requires a devil or a spellbook. It only requires a community that carries small beliefs like tools in a pocket. The earliest ideas linking brooms with movement through the air come from human bodies, not the sky. Villagers dance, they jump, and they straddle poles in games and fertility rites. Imagine a field after the harvest. The ground is rough with stubble. A bonfire burns. People drink ale from wooden cups. Someone beats a drum. A circle forms. They leap and shout until their lungs burn. On such a night, someone might grab a broom or a staff and ride it as a joke, a bet, or a gesture meant to bring luck to the next crop. A person jumping while straddling a stick creates a simple illusion. For a moment, both feet leave the ground, the body rises, and the stick points forward. The crowd laughs. Someone swears they saw the rider rise higher than a normal jump. The story grows after the ale runs out. These moments matter because, later, authorities take them seriously in the worst possible way. Churchmen and magistrates, already wary of pagan customs, look for symbols to condemn. They fix their attention on mundane objects, because mundane objects are easy to find. A carved idol can be hidden, a secret book can be burned. But a broom stands in every house. Once suspicion attaches to it, no one can claim ignorance. Before any court began writing about witches on broomsticks, Europe already carried a heavy burden of anxiety regarding women and domestic power. A woman knows herbs because she treats fevers, stomach pains, infected wounds, and difficult births. She knows which plant quiets a cough and which causes vomiting. She learns this from older women, by trial and error, watching animals and listening to travelers. Neighbors ask for her help because they have little choice. When a child cries all night with a burning forehead, the mother goes to the woman with the herbs. When a cow stops eating, the farmer asks the same woman to come and look. Her authority breeds resentment. If the patient survives, the healer is praised. If the patient dies, the healer becomes a target. In the medieval world, death comes often. Infection takes people in days. Famine weakens bodies throughout the winter. In such an environment, an accusation becomes a form of relief. It gives grief a shape and anger a direction. A community that already believes in curses may decide a death was caused by malice, rather than misfortune. Once that decision is made, every familiar object in the accused woman's house turns into evidence. The pot becomes a cauldron. The pouch of herbs becomes a kit of poisons. The broom becomes a vehicle for secret travel. The connection of the broom to women's work strengthens this logic. The broom is visible. It can be described in a single sentence. A neighbor who wants to accuse someone might say, "I saw her with a broom at a strange hour. I saw her sweeping at night." None of these observations prove anything, but they sound concrete. They sound mundane. That is why they work. Courts often prefer mundane details because they give a confession the feel of real life. As the late medieval world built its theory of witchcraft, it needed a way for witches to move. If they met for conspiracies, they needed a way to get there. Stories of supernatural flight already lived in the imagination. Saints rode clouds in legends, and spirits crossed distances in a breath. The broom offered a simple physical anchor for this imagination. It was long, it could be straddled, it belonged to women, and it stood by the door as if waiting for a moment to depart. Early depictions of witches riding brooms carry this same mix of banality and horror. They don't show queens of darkness in jeweled crowns, they show ordinary women in work clothes, headscarves, and simple dresses, faces that could belong to anyone's aunt. The broom beneath them makes the scene feel like a distorted version of everyday life. This distortion sharpens the edge. The threat comes from within the village, from within the home, from the sphere that men often ignored until it became dangerous. There is also a private dimension that later confessions dragged into the light. Household objects touch bodies. The handle of a broom is smooth from hands and use. When authorities began to claim that witches used flying ointments and applied them in intimate ways, they turned shame into a weapon. They dragged private practices into the language of the court. The broom became a tool for humiliation because it was both domestic and phallic in the minds of accusers fixated on sin. This is one of the darkest drivers of the broom myth. It gave interrogators a way to turn an ordinary object into a dirty symbol, and then present that symbol as proof of evil. In everyday life, none of this has to be true for the legend to grow. The broom exists in almost every home. This ubiquity does all the work. It means that any story featuring a broom can spread rapidly because every listener can visualize it. A rumor about a rare artifact dies when people cannot imagine it. A rumor about a broom stays alive because everyone has held one. Everyone knows its weight. Everyone knows what it's like as a child to straddle a stick and pretend it's a horse. The broom carries that childhood game along with its soot and dust. When fear arrives, it borrows the familiarity of the object and makes it sinister. A scribe sharpens his quill with a small knife and blows the shavings off the table. He sits close to the window because the winter light is fading fast. Outside, the street smells of damp wood and horse manure. Inside the room, it smells of ink, parchment, and smoke from the brazier. He transcribes words that carry a warning. Heresy spreads like a disease, the priest says. Secret meetings occur at night, the priest says. Women speak at these gatherings, the priest says, and men listen to them. The scribe keeps his head down and writes. He has learned how quickly a wrong idea turns into an accusation, and how quickly an accusation turns into a sentence. At the edge of the page, an illustrator sketches figures similar to the people he passed in the market. A woman in a headscarf, a woman in a simple dress, a woman with a broom between her legs. The first broom riders in the historical record appear not as characters in a fairy tale, but as suspects. In 15th century Europe, the church is battling old religious practices, local folk customs, and organized dissent. Reform movements are growing in pockets across the continent, some quiet, others loud. Some seek to simplify worship. Some reject church authority. Some allow women a voice that parish life rarely grants them. Authorities pin labels on these groups that stick like glue. Then, they attach those names to accusations that terrify the public. The Waldensians are one such group. Their opponents call them witches and devil worshippers in pamphlets and sermons. The accusation spreads. Such a label doesn't need solid evidence to cause harm, it needs repetition. It needs a few witnesses who fear punishment and want to survive. It needs a court that treats confession as truth and denial as proof of guilt. A mid-15th century manuscript contains an image that becomes a seed. A woman sits astride a broom, and another astride a stick. The figures are dressed in ordinary clothes, signaling modesty and poverty. The scene ties women, heresy, and illicit movement together in a single frame. It carries a warning that hits the eye before the mind. The woman looks like a neighbor. The broom looks like a domestic tool. The idea that she can fly through the air on it hits with a shock. Because the object remains familiar, the picture needs no explanation. Viewers fill in the rest with everything they already fear regarding secret meetings and rebellious women. A page like this travels among clerics and the educated elite. Then, fragments of its ideas drift down into common conversation. Conversations change faster than doctrine. In villages, people exchange stories at wells, ovens, and taverns. They trade stories while mending nets and spinning wool. A rumor about a woman seen on the street after dark attaches itself to a rumor about herbs. The rumor about herbs attaches to a rumor about illness. Then, someone mentions a broom left leaning in a strange place. The broom becomes the detail that makes the story seem true. A peasant doesn't need a theological treatise, a peasant needs a mental picture. The broom rider provides that picture. The story spreads because it feels concrete. People can describe it in a few sentences. They can argue about whether it happened. They can laugh while repeating it, and then fall silent when the wrong person enters the room. Authorities learn to use these stories. They build an image of witchcraft that depends on meetings, movement, and conspiracy. A witch who sits at home doesn't fit their model. A witch who rides out to a sabbat does. The sabbat itself serves a purpose. It turns scattered fears into a unified event. It makes witchcraft sound organized. It makes it sound like a rival church. It gives prosecutors a structure for interrogation. It gives judges a structure for sentencing. A suspect who can be forced to say, "I went to the meeting and saw these people there," becomes a tool for mass arrests. A suspect who can be forced to say, "I traveled through the air," becomes a spectacle. Spectacle is important because it draws attention and creates support for persecutions. It turns the audience into accomplices. The broom becomes useful because it gives the flight a prop that everyone already understands. In the mid-15th century, trials begin to collect these details. The broom rider appears in confessions, and these confessions appear under pressure. Courts use imprisonment, threats, and torture. They use isolation. They use sleep deprivation. They use the fear of fire. A captive quickly learns that silence entails harsher treatment. A captive learns that compliance brings relief. When an interrogator asks, "How did you travel?" the captive looks for an answer that meets the interrogator's expectations. The interrogator has heard stories. The interrogator has read pamphlets. The interrogator has a priest nearby whispering of devils and pacts. The interrogator offers the suspect the words that must be spoken. The suspect repeats them. The scribe records them. The page becomes evidence. Evidence becomes precedent. Precedent becomes the script followed by other interrogators. A priest named Guillaume becomes a case that later writers cannot stop repeating. He stands in a courtroom in France in the 1450s, surrounded by officials who treat dissent as danger. Edeline had criticized witch trials, and that alone makes him a threat to those who conduct them. He also has enemies who benefit from his downfall. The trial drags forward. Questions turn into accusations. Accusations turn into demands for confession. Under torture, Edeline says he used an ointment. He says he anointed a stick. He says he rode on it. Details change in the retellings, but the structure remains. Ointment, staff or broom, flight. The structure matches what the authorities want. It matches what the public finds terrifying. It also matches what later artists can draw in a single frame. A man or woman on a broom, taking off over the roofline, provides a clean silhouette. The image does the work that thousands of pages of legal language cannot. Printing accelerates this process. By the late 15th and early 16th centuries, woodcuts and broadsheets turn witch stories into mass media. A printer can carve a simple scene into a block and stamp it again and again. The details don't need to match any specific case, they need to match the public's expectations. A witch rides a broom. The devil waits nearby. A cauldron boils. A village burns. A mother cries. People buy the sheet, pin it to a wall, discuss it with neighbors, and carry it to the next town. The broom rider becomes a standard image, as recognizable as a crown on a king. When fear has a standard image, fear is easier to sell. The broom rider also serves as a way to control women in public spaces. A woman who moves freely already draws attention in many communities. A woman who walks alone at night triggers suspicion. A woman who lives outside a household controlled by a husband or adult son triggers suspicion. A widow triggers suspicion. A midwife triggers suspicion. A healer triggers suspicion. A poor woman who argues with neighbors triggers suspicion. When prosecutors and priests describe witches, they are describing women whose lives are already on the margins. The broom does something important here. It turns these women into actors. It turns them into people who can act quickly and over long distances. A village that feels powerless in the face of disease, crop failure, and war can accept the idea that someone nearby has a secret power. Secret power makes an event seem explainable. It also makes punishment seem meaningful. Religious conflict fuels this hunger for explanation. Europe in this period holds tension like dry wood holds heat. The church faces criticism. Reform movements split communities. Wars redraw borders. The plague returns in waves. Families watch children die in a single week. People look for causes. They also look for scapegoats. Priests and magistrates provide scapegoats because scapegoats protect authority. A witch riding a broom to a sabbat provides an enemy to hunt. This enemy also reinforces sermons on obedience, sexuality, and proper behavior. The witch becomes an example used to frighten the faithful into submission. The broom becomes the mark of her crime because it belongs to domestic life, the very sphere that moral teaching seeks to control. Accusations also become more explicitly sexual, and the broom sits at the center of this vileness. Interrogators ask about pacts with devils. They ask about physical acts. They ask about bodies. They ask questions designed to humiliate. The broom handle appears in these reports as an object of shame and power. A prosecutor can describe the broom and force the accused woman to talk about it before men. He can seat her on a bench, bind her wrists, and keep pressing until she repeats his words. The record then preserves this humiliation. The record travels. It turns into a story people tell with a smirk, and then with a gasp of horror. It turns into a warning used against other women. The broom rider becomes a figure of uncontrolled female sexuality in the minds of those who want control. This association spreads through the same channels as everything else: sermons, pamphlets, tavern talk, and the theatrical halls of the courts. At the same time, the image remains stubbornly mundane. It is precisely this part that causes it to take root. A noble woman on a gilded horse looks distant. A poor woman on a broom looks close. This proximity creates anxiety. A household can lock the door against bandits. It cannot lock the mind against the thought that the woman who borrowed salt last week might fly past the chimney tonight. The chimney itself becomes part of the scenery. Houses have chimneys. Houses have roofs. People already imagine smoke leaving the chimney and rising upward. This vertical movement becomes an easy mental bridge to flight. Artists draw witches flying out through chimneys because it creates a powerful image. Viewers accept this because they have watched smoke move exactly that way since childhood. There is a practical detail playing a role in the background. Rural communities keep brooms near the hearth because the hearth provides heat and keeps tools dry. A broom by the fireplace stays close at hand. The broom handle may eventually darken with soot. A visitor sees it leaning by the fire and thinks nothing of it. Later, when suspicion spreads, this same broom becomes a key in retrospect. People begin to recontextualize objects. This habit drives the witch panic more than any single event. Once a community decides someone is dangerous, every mundane choice becomes part of the case. Why did she keep her broom there? Why was she sweeping at that hour? Why did she leave it outside? Why did she carry it to the field? None of these actions are crimes. Under the influence of fear, they become evidence. Courts in this period also rely on spectacle. A trial attracts crowds. People want to see the accused. People want to hear the charges. Some come from genuine fear. Some come from boredom. Some come because they want to confirm their suspicions. A confession including flight on a broomstick provides both entertainment and moral reinforcement. It gives the crowd an image to take home. It also gives them a sense of participation. They watch the exposure of a sinner. They watched authority restore order. They leave with a story confirming what they already believed. The broom rider then becomes a fragment of folklore that feels official, because it is taken from a court record, even if it was obtained under torture. In some regions, accusations also track social conflict. A dispute over a boundary, a debt, a broken promise, a dead animal, or a failed batch of beer can end in an accusation. The accused woman might have used a broom in the course of the dispute, sweeping the threshold, cleaning a stall, working in a tavern. A neighbor can point to that broom and turn it into a symbol of the woman's supposed power. A story of flight sounds extreme, and extreme stories can overwhelm mundane facts. An accuser doesn't need proof of flight. An accuser needs a community ready to believe that the accused is endowed with hidden abilities. Once that readiness appears, the broom functions as a banner. Some intellectuals and clergymen argue about the nature of witch flights. They debate whether it occurs in the body or in the mind. Some claim that devils carry witches through the air. Others declare that witches imagine it in dreams. These disputes still ultimately serve the persecutions because the accused remains guilty. Under any theory, the debate gives prosecutors the chance to appear educated while they continue to burn people. It also gives writers new ways to describe the same scene. A broom rider can be depicted physically flying or traveling spiritually. The public rarely cares about the distinction. The public cares about the image of a woman breaking the laws of nature and society, leaving her home without permission, and secretly meeting others. This image feeds the fear and keeps it alive. A girl grows up in this world, hearing the stories before she even begins to understand them. She hears them in snatches of phrases. She hears them as jokes. She hears them as threats whispered during arguments. She hears them when adults warn her to avoid certain houses. She watches women sweep, and she watches how men look at them. She learns which women receive smiles and which receive narrowed glances. She learns that a broom can be a tool and a symbol at the same time. She learns that symbols can kill. A boy grows up learning a similar lesson. He learns that female knowledge can be presented as a danger. He learns that the home can be seen as a battlefield in moral teaching. He learns that a woman stepping outside the bounds of expected behavior becomes a target. The broom rider becomes the shorthand for all of this. By the time the witch on a broomstick becomes a common character in the European imagination, the image rests on a foundation laid by courts, the press, religious conflicts, and local grudges. It also relies on a simple physical fact. A broom looks like something a person can straddle. Children already do it in play. Adults have already seen people do it in festive games. Once authorities decide that witches travel to secret meetings, the broom offers itself as the simplest vehicle. It stands in the corner of the house, the most ordinary object in the room, waiting for someone to claim it carries a person into the night. A woman sits at a rough wooden table. A lump of wax is pressed into a candle stub. The flame shivers every time the door opens. On the table, on a flat board, she lays out dried leaves, seeds, and small roots. She sorts them by smell and texture. Some she keeps in cloth pouches tied with twine, others in a clay jar sealed with fat. Her hands move with practiced motions. She pinches off a leaf, rubs it between her fingers, and brings it to her nose. She spits a piece of bitter root into her palm and wipes it on the edge of her apron. This work has taken place in kitchens and barns across Europe for centuries. It happens because people get sick, and doctors are rare and expensive. It also happens because knowledge is passed through women, more often than the courts admit. A mother teaches her daughter which plant soothes a cough. A midwife teaches an apprentice how to boil water and keep the cloth clean. A healer learns what amount of an herb is safe by watching what happens when someone takes too much. The difference between relief and poison lies in the size of the pinch. A court looks at this table and sees a crime. A magistrate hears of jars and pouches and decides the jars hold curses. A priest hears the names of plants and decides these names belong to the devil. When a village falls into fear, ordinary medicines are retold as dark recipes. Accusation draws medicine into the language of witchcraft because it creates a clear villain. It also gives officials a reason to interfere in private life. They can search a house. They can interrogate a woman about what she keeps in her cupboard. They can treat her knowledge as a threat to public order. Once this shift occurs, the broom begins to stand next to the pot and the pouch as part of a single story. The story says the woman uses herbs to change her body and then uses the broom to travel. This story grows not from careful observation, but from interrogation. The template appears early. In 1324, a noble family in Ireland finds itself at the center of scandal and bloodshed. Lady Alice Kittler stands at the center of events. She has been married several times. She has money. She has property. She has enemies who want what she has. When her fourth husband falls ill and dies, suspicion tightens around her like a rope. Accusations against her pile up. They include poison. They include heresy. They include deals with a demon. Investigators claim they find a powder and an ointment. The language in the records turns household items into evidence. A small tube or container becomes proof of a secret practice. A wooden staff becomes proof of travel. The story says she greased the staff with fat and rode it at night. The claim enters the archive and stays there. Kittler escapes. She flees before the court can seize her. Her maidservant, Petronilla de Meath, has no escape. Petronilla is interrogated. She's beaten. She's forced to talk. She becomes the body the court can punish in place of the body that slipped away. She's executed. The crowd watches a woman burn and learns a lesson about power. This lesson has a second layer. It says that a woman who knows too much and lives outside a man's control can put everyone in danger. These early cases are important because they show the basic mechanics. Officials look for an object that can carry the charge. Ointment serves this purpose. It sits on the edge between medicine and poison. People already recognize that ointments can change the body. An ointment can stop pain. An ointment can relieve a rash. An ointment can warm the skin. It becomes easy to accept that another ointment could do something stranger. When fear meets an ointment, fear supplies the result. The prosecutor asks, "What did you put in it?" The suspect names plants she has used for years. The prosecutor writes down these names as ingredients of evil. The judge hears this list and imagines a recipe book. The crowd hears this list and repeats it with new details. Soon, the ointment becomes the link between the broom on the wall and the flight in the story. The plants most frequently mentioned in these reports are plants with real effects. Henbane, belladonna, mandrake, hemlock, datura, and other members of the coarse family of dangerous herbs grow in fields, along roads, and at the edges of gardens. They smell sharp. They taste bitter. They can kill. They can also put one to sleep. They can dry the mouth, blur the vision, make the heart beat faster, and fill a person with confusion. A healer learns to fear and respect them. She knows that a small amount can dull pain. She knows that a larger amount can plunge a person into a deep sleep. She knows that a careless dose can stop the breath. This is practical knowledge. It comes from bodies and mistakes. It also comes from desperation. If a person screams from a toothache, people will try anything. If a person thrashes in a fever, people will try anything. When a community lacks reliable medicine, risky plants go into use anyway. In court records and later witch hunting manuals, these plants appear in a more extreme role. Writers claim that witches use them in an ointment that allows flight. The claim often includes a specific method. The ointment is rubbed into a stick, a staff, or a broom. Sometimes the confession claims the ointment is applied to the skin. Sometimes the confession uses explicit language about application to intimate zones. These details serve a purpose in the courtroom. They drive the accused into shame. They give the interrogator control. They also make the story vivid for listeners. Vivid stories spread. A confession that sounds boring doesn't go far. A confession with sex, ointment, and flight flies fast. There is also a simple pharmacological reason why the flight story appears so often. Once these plants enter the narrative, when tropane alkaloids enter the body, a person can experience disorientation so intense that the mind loses its usual sense of space. A person may feel as if they are moving when they are lying still. A person may see scenes that feel real. A person may experience bodily sensations that feel physical. These are hallucinations and delusions produced by a brain under stress. People in the medieval and early modern world rarely have the concept to describe a drug-induced hallucination as a chemical event. They describe it as a spiritual event. They describe it as a dream sent by devils or spirits. They describe it as a journey. If a person under this influence later tries to explain what happened, flight becomes a suitable word. It matches the sensation of movement. It matches the social stories already circulating around. It fits the interrogator's script. The 16th century physician, Anders de Laguna, provides one of the clearest examples of the gap between lived experience and interpretation. He hears of witches' ointments and decides to test one. He describes a case where a woman is rubbed with an ointment and falls into a long sleep. When she wakes, she insists that she enjoyed great pleasures and grows angry when told it was a drug-induced state. Her anger is a physical scene. She lashes out, she complains. She firmly believes her experience was real. Laguna looks at the same scene and sees a chemical reaction. He sees a body that has absorbed a plant compound and entered a delirium. He concludes that the sensation of flight and the feeling of an erotic encounter can be products of the substance itself. His conclusion does not stop the witch trials. Courts rarely adjust their procedures based on a physician's doubts. The public also prefers the moral story over the medical one. The moral story assigns a culprit, the medical story assigns chance and biology. This same pattern repeats endlessly in witch trial testimonies. An accused woman is interrogated about nocturnal journeys. She describes them in the language available to her. Some speak of dreams, some of being carried, some of riding. The interrogator insists on details that fit the theory of the Sabbat. He asks, "How did you get there?" The accused, exhausted and terrified, picks the most recognizable object in her house: a broom, a staff, a pitchfork, a familiar tool. This choice then becomes a fixed detail in the written record. The record becomes a template used in subsequent trials, pushing future confessions toward that same detail. Over time, flying on a broomstick becomes less of an observation and more of a mandatory answer. The mechanics of the interrogation are vital here, because they shape the reality inherited by later generations. A confession wrung out under torture is rarely a free narrative, it is a negotiation for survival. The captive observes what brings the interrogator satisfaction. She learns that the interrogator needs certain markers: a pact, a devil, a meeting, the names of accomplices, and proof of flight. She provides these markers because pain and fear narrow the mind to one goal, making the questions stop. The captive doesn't need to believe in the story for it to end up on the page. The scribe writes it down regardless. The record then enters the system as truth because the legal system views confession as the supreme proof. Women in these trials often face a second layer of vulnerability. They sit before men who control their bodies and their futures. Many are poor, uneducated, and lack an advocate willing to risk the authorities' wrath. Their social position already makes them easy targets. When they confess, they use the material of their own lives. They mention a broom because a broom stands in their house. They mention an ointment because they used liniments for ordinary ailments. They mention a pot because they cook. They mention a bundle of herbs because they dry herbs for tea and poultices. Thus, their daily labor becomes the raw material for the accusation. The court takes the visible world of a woman's life and reconstructs it into a story of evil. Some cases include details suggesting a real practice lay beneath the layer of hysteria. Folk healers did indeed create ointments and tinctures. Some were intended for pain relief, some as sedatives. Others were used in reproductive contexts, to induce menstruation or miscarriage, to ease labor, or to reduce bleeding. These uses sit dangerously close to taboo and fear. Male authorities often react to female control over reproduction with obsession and panic. When a midwife has the power to influence the outcome of a pregnancy, she holds a power that men in the church and state wish to regulate. If a woman is suspected of using herbs to cause infertility or a miscarriage, the charge can quickly slide into witchcraft. Once witchcraft enters the fray, that same herbal knowledge becomes a weapon in the narrative. An ointment becomes a flying ointment because it provides a dramatic result. There is also the matter of application. Some historical reports suggest that these liniments were sometimes applied to areas of the skin where absorption is fastest. This might include mucous membranes or areas like the armpits and groin. Such an application could provide a strong effect without ingesting the substance, reducing nausea and making the dosage more controlled. A practitioner who learned this through experience might view it as a technical technique. A court interprets it as obscenity, and a pamphleteer as proof of depravity. The same act becomes different things depending on who holds the pen. In the hands of witch hunters, it becomes a pornographic detail used to incite disgust. Once the idea of the flying ointment spreads, it changes how people interpret ordinary illness and normal behavior. A woman falling into a delirium from fever might mutter about movement, voices, lights, and strange encounters. Her family may already fear sorcery, her neighbors may already be whispering, the priest may already be preaching about devils in the night. When she says she flew, that claim takes hold. It may start as a fevered hallucination and end as sworn testimony. The same happens with substances. If someone steals or discovers a jar of ointment in a suspect's house, they might out of fear or curiosity smear it on an animal, a tool, or a person. If the substance contains psychoactive plants, that person may experience delirium. The community then receives a vivid story that seems confirmed by experiment. The cycle feeds itself. The role of the broom becomes clearer here. A broom is long and smooth enough to be handled like a staff. It is also associated with the hearth and with women. In the logic of the witch hunters, this makes it perfect. They need an object that links the accused woman both to the domestic space and to transgressive movement. The broom provides that link. It also provides plausible deniability within the story. A woman can leave her house holding a broom and no one will ask why. She can go to the barn to sweep, go to a neighbor's house to help clean after an illness, or carry it down an alley without attracting attention. This normality becomes a cover in the imagination. The story says she hides her secret travels in plain sight. This detail makes the story truly sinister to people who already suspect deception. Court records sometimes describe witches riding sticks, pitchforks, poles, and animals. But the broomstick eventually comes to dominate because it has a clear identity. It appears in art, in satire, in sermons. It belongs to female labor in a way a random pole does not. When a storyteller wants to signal witchcraft quickly, the broom does it in an instant. The icon grows through repetition. The ointment helps fix it in place because it provides a mechanism. A broom without a mechanism is just a stick. A broom with ointment becomes a device. Thus, the myth gains an internal logic. It sounds crude, but it satisfies the mind's craving for cause and effect. Rub the broom, straddle it, fly. This period also gives rise to a class of writers who act as prosecutors on paper. They collect tales, confessions, and theories into manuals. They claim to describe how witchcraft works. They list ingredients, rituals, and signs. They pretend to offer certainty, and their certainty becomes a tool for institutions. A judge torn by doubt can lean on the manual, a priest can preach from it. A neighbor can borrow its language for an accusation. The manual creates a shared script. Once the script includes ointment and flight, these elements become expected features in future cases. Even a suspect who has never heard of flying ointment might learn about it during interrogation. When the investigator describes it as if it were common knowledge, the bodies involved in these cases pay the price. A woman is arrested. She is held in a cell smelling of urine and damp straw. Her wrists are tied. Her hair is shorn. Her skin is searched for marks. She is interrogated 4 hours. She is shown tools of torture. She is promised relief if she speaks. She is threatened with pain if she refuses. She begins to say anything just to make the session end. She names the herbs she recognizes. She describes the ointment. She describes a dream. The interrogator turns the dream into a journey. The interrogator turns the ointment into magical fuel. The interrogator suggests the broom. The woman repeats after him. The broom. The scribe writes. The verdict follows. In many regions, this verdict ends in execution. There is irony in how chemistry lives within this cruelty. The very same plants that the courts present as tools of evil exist in the wider medical world. Physicians and apothecaries use dangerous substances in a controlled manner. They prescribe opiates, use belladonna in tiny doses for specific conditions, bleed patients, and give them laxatives. They give them compounds that can harm as much as heal. When an educated man uses a remedy, it is presented as medicine. When a poor woman uses a remedy, it is presented as witchcraft. This difference is not based on chemistry, it is based on status, gender, and institutional power. The myth of the broom rider thrives in this gap because it sits on the border between knowledge and permission. It punishes those who practice outside approved structures. In some places, the story of flight begins to change as skepticism grows among certain elites. Some argue that devils deceive women through dreams, some that the body remains in bed while the mind wanders. This argument still condemns the accused because it presents the experience as sinful and voluntary. It also keeps the broom in play. A dream still needs an image. The broom can exist as a vehicle for dreams, allowing authorities to keep the icon while adjusting the explanation. The icon is more important than the physics. The icon makes the public fear. It also entertains them. The printer places a fresh sheet of paper onto the press bed and checks the edges with his fingertips. The workshop smells of ink, damp paper, and the hot metal of a small stove. An apprentice rolls ink over a carved wooden block, and the printer lowers the plate with a practiced jerk. When he lifts it again, the image appears in reverse and then in reality. A woman flying on a broom across the night sky. Her skirt flutters at her knees. A small animal clings tightly to her. Below her, roofs lean at sharp angles, and a chimney sticks up like a finger. The image dries on a rack alongside other sheets. There are also words set in tight type, describing a confession, a meeting, a pact, and a punishment. The printer does not argue with the content. He counts his coins. He folds the pages. Fear sells well. By the 16th century, the witch hunt had moved beyond local grudges and parish gossip. It was becoming a system that repeated across different regions. Courts developed routines. Clergy developed a language. City councils established procedures for arrest, imprisonment, and execution. The broom rode along with this mechanism because it met a new need for a clear, public image. The accused often came from the fringes of the social order. Widows, maidservants, midwives, beggars, women living alone, women who spoke sharply, women who sold herbs, women with few defenders. When authorities dragged them to court, the accusation rarely remained minor. It grew into a complete story. This story included travel, because travel implied planning and coordination. A witch who could move quickly became a threat to multiple households, multiple farms, and multiple parishes. When a judge wanted to convince a crowd of the necessity of an execution, a narrative that sounded organized and dangerous was useful. The image of the broom rider provided this. People already knew the shape of a broom. They knew what it looked like leaning by the door. When they heard that a woman used this object to leave her home and meet secretly with others, the familiar form transformed into a weapon in the mind. A courtroom in a market town operated with physical regularity. Guards led in prisoners with bound wrists. A clerk sat with ink and paper. A magistrate sat on a dais behind a table. A priest stood nearby, watching the faces in the crowd. Witnesses stepped forward and pointed fingers. They described quarrels. They described livestock falling dead. They described a child who withered after a fever. They described butter that refused to churn. They described ale that turned sour. Each detail laid a small stone, and the pile grew. Then the questions shifted. The magistrate asked about night meetings. He asked about leaving the house. He asked about roads and crossroads. He asked about barns, fields, and secluded places. The accused woman might answer in snatches. She might cry. She might refuse. She might beg. The magistrate pressed until the answers began to resemble the story he expected. He asked how she traveled. She mentioned a stick, a staff, or a broom, because it was what she owned and what the questions seemed to demand. The clerk recorded the words, as if they were spoken clearly and voluntarily. The crowd heard the phrase and repeated it as they left. By the end of the day, a new rumor had entered the town, and this rumor now bore the seal of the court. The broom also gained a stage through public punishment. Executions took place in daylight on open fields or at the edge of town, where many could gather. People brought children. They bought bread and beer from vendors. They climbed onto carts or stood on barrels to see better. Officials read the charges aloud. Sometimes the condemned spoke, sometimes she was silent. The sentence ended with fire, hanging, or beheading, depending on local laws. The crowd watched the body struggle, then grow still. Afterward, people talked about what they had seen. Some felt relief, some excitement, some nausea. Many felt a stern satisfaction that order had been restored. In these conversations, the details of the confession became as important as the death itself. The confession of flying on a broom gave the crowd something easy to repeat. It also gave them an image to hold onto. A woman leaving through a chimney or rising over a field. The execution confirmed the story in the minds of everyone who already feared witches. Those who doubted might remain silent, for doubt could invite suspicion. Chimneys became a key part of the broom's image because they were at the center of domestic life. A chimney marked a house from a distance. It also marked a house from within, drawing smoke and smells upward. People watched smoke rise every day. They watched sparks fly. They watched soot gather. They swept ash from the hearth with small brooms and brushes. Artists and pamphlet makers used this because it was easy to draw and easy to understand. A chimney gave a clean vertical line. A witch on a broom gave a clean diagonal. Join them together, and the image was instantly readable. This is one reason why flying out of a chimney appears so often in woodcuts and paintings. The audience recognized the details. The audience completed the movement in their own minds. The story gained power, even when court records showed far fewer little chimney flights than later folklore suggested. The printed image eventually shaped memory more strongly than eyewitness testimony. Artists contributed as well. In the Netherlands and other countries, masters filled scenes with devils, cauldrons, and flying figures. A viewer could stand before a print and point at the broom riders. A viewer might laugh, then look again and feel uneasy. The picture gave people permission to imagine witches as a real category of people, rather than just a rumor about a neighbor. The image also standardized the details. The broom became the default vehicle, even if local stories had used other objects. The witch became old, or sometimes young. Her hair became disheveled, her face sharp. Beside her, an animal appeared. A cat, a toad, a hare. These visual habits spread because artists copied each other, and because buyers wanted what felt familiar. Over time, the broom rider turned into a formulaic figure. When people saw a broom leaning against a door, they could now see two things at once: the tool for cleaning, and the silhouette from the printer woman rising above the roof. This was also the period when professional witch hunting took shape in some regions. Certain authorities appointed men to find suspects, collect testimony, and extract confessions. These men rode from village to village and applied a method. They asked the same questions. They watched for reactions. They looked for conflicts that could be turned into accusations. They focused on households already in distress. A poor family with debts became vulnerable. A widow relying on alms became vulnerable. A woman who asked for food and was refused became vulnerable, because the refusal could lead to guilt if misfortune followed. If a cow died after a quarrel, the owner wanted to find a reason. The witch hunter provided it. He told the owner that witchcraft operated through malice and envy. He told the owner to remember every strange moment, every sharp word, every look. The owner now reviewed his life like a ledger and picked everything that could support an accusation. He might remember a broom in the corner. He might remember seeing the woman carrying it at twilight. He might remember her sweeping outside when the air felt strange. The witch hunter recorded it. The detail gained a place in the official story. Witch trials also depended on chains of accusation. A terrified prisoner named others because naming others could reduce the pressure, delay execution, or satisfy the interrogators. The named person was arrested, interrogated, and forced to confess. That second person named even more people. Soon, an entire village was caught in a web. In such an environment, confession became currency. People offered details that sounded convincing. Details about brooms sounded convincing because brooms existed everywhere. A prisoner could say they saw another woman flying away on a broom because the listener already knew what that looked like in their imagination. A prisoner could say they met others at night because night meetings already existed. 4 ordinary reasons for lovers, 4 thieves, 4 neighbors needing privacy. The court merged ordinary behavior with the accusatory story. Those who survived often did so by aligning their words with what the court expected. Those who refused might face harsher pressure. As the mechanism worked, the broom rider appeared more and more in the records, and the records then became proof for the next trial. Writers claiming expertise added another layer. They collected cases, rumors, and theological claims into books promising clarity. Judges and clergy used these texts as handbooks, and the text then influenced how interrogations were conducted. The books described how witches traveled, what they did at meetings, and what signs exposed them. The books often included the broom, the ointment, and the sabbat because these details made the story vivid. A vivid story helped a judge convince himself he was acting for the good of the community. It helped a priest convince his parishioners that harsh measures were justified. It also helped local officials justify spending money on prisons, guards, and executions. Once a bureaucratic machine formed around the witch hunt, the machine required a constant flow of cases. The story of the broom rider sustained this flow because it made witchcraft sound active and urgent. Within households, the broom becomes an object of fear through small, everyday gestures. A woman notices her neighbor's broom left outside and thinks of the latest rumors. A man passes a doorway, sees a broom leaned at an odd angle, and recalls a pamphlet he once read. A child hears adults mention night flights and begins to look at chimneys with suspicion. In a village gripped by tension, a family might even hide their broom or keep it strictly out of sight. Yet, because life demands it, people keep sweeping. They continue to clean stalls and scrub floors. Fear does not remove the broom from life, it changes the meaning people attach to it. The tool becomes a symbol, and symbols can drive people to violence. The judicial process rewards the kind of speech that fits the pre-written script. When a witness says, "I saw her fly on a broom," they command attention. The claim sounds concrete, it provides a scene that can be repeated. A witness who simply says, "I don't like her," or "we had an argument," offers far less to a court hungry for conviction. Courts often prefer a dramatic statement that transcends ordinary conflict, and this preference encourages further drama. It also nudges the accused to confess in dramatic terms, as drama signals alignment with the interrogator's worldview. Once the broom is established in this world, it becomes a reliable element to include. Confessing to a broom flight becomes a ritual passage in the interrogation, a key that unlocks the next stage. The naming of accomplices, the description of devils, the cataloguing of harm. The broom becomes a narrative hinge, swinging domestic life into the realm of conspiracy. Across early modern Europe, these patterns vary by region and law, yet the overall effect remains constant. The image of the broom rider spreads further than any individual trial. It crosses borders via printed sheets, traveling preachers, soldiers, merchants, and displaced families. A traveler carries the story from one town to the next, a preacher repeats it in a sermon. A local official uses it to justify a new round of arrests. By the time much of Europe begins to retreat from the worst witch panics, the broom rider has frozen into folklore. It is captured in art and popular entertainment, persisting even as judges and scholars begin to doubt the reality of physical flight. The image stays because it is useful. It provides a clear enemy and a clear story to retell. The town crier stands in the square, with paper in hand, and reads aloud. The crowd shifts and murmurs. Names come out one by one. Some listeners cross themselves, some look at the ground, some exchange glances carrying old grudges. The crier reads the accusations in the same tone he uses for taxes and lost cattle. The mundanity of his voice makes the content seem official, routine, established. The story of the broom flight becomes a part of civic life, as ordinary to the public ear as an ordinance on market weights. This is the moment when myth turns into the official record in the mind of the community. A broom leaned in the corner can now carry the full weight of the law, because the law has spent decades teaching people exactly what to see when they look at it. A woman stands at the edge of a crowded room with a broom in her hand because she arrived early, and the floor looks neglected. Dirt is dried in ridges near the door. Straw and ash cling to the corners. She works in short strokes, gathering the grit into a pile, then sweeping it into a tray. Men sit at the table behind her, talking without lowering their voices. They speak of prices, a sick cow, a neighbor who refuses to pay a debt. Someone laughs. Someone spits into the rush matting. The woman continues to sweep. When she finished, she leans the broom against the wall and goes to the hearth to stir the pot. Later, when arguments flare and someone needs a target, her broom will become part of the story they tell about her. They will say she always has it in her hand. They will say she always stands on thresholds. They will say she watches who enters and who leaves. The broom remains in sight, and visibility turns into suspicion the moment the community decides it needs a villain. Throughout early modern Europe, the broom exists inside a larger struggle over who holds power within the household. The household is where food is kept, money is hidden, children are raised, and labor is organized. Women manage most of this work. They decide how long the flour will last, when to sell the eggs, how to stretch the pottage, and which child gets an extra piece of bread on a cold day. They also manage information. They know who is ill, who is pregnant, who is short on fuel, and which husband drinks too much. These facts move through the village like smoke from the hearth, and women are the ones who carry them. When society feels stable, this informal power can coexist alongside the formal power of men. When society feels threatened, informal power becomes a problem. Authorities prefer an order that passes through channels they control: the church, the court, the guild, and the male-headed household. Women who hold influence outside these channels attract attention. The broom, as the simplest sign of a woman's domestic role, becomes a tool to accuse her of stepping out of her place. The work that sustains life also creates opportunities for conflict. Brewing is one example. In many towns and villages, women brew ale for their households and sometimes for sale. Brewing requires grain, a large pot, water, and time. It also requires trust, as buyers cannot judge quality until they drink. A woman selling ale can earn cash. She can lend small sums. She can refuse to extend credit. She can support herself after a husband's death, competing with male brewers as markets and guild rules change. People watching these shifts find ways to interpret them as moral threats. A broom outside a door might serve as a simple sign that ale is available, the way a shop sign announces a trade. If a town begins to resent a woman who sells ale, the sign outside her door becomes a prop in a story. She stands near the threshold. She takes money. She argues with customers. She keeps a cat to catch mice near the grain stores. She uses herbs for flavor or preservation. These are ordinary features of the work, but under suspicion, they become the ingredients of an indictment. The broom as a sign for ale becomes the broom as a sign for witchcraft. The shift occurs through gossip, resentment, and the desire to discipline women who earn their own way. Midwives and healers face an even sharper danger because they enter the most vulnerable rooms. A midwife arrives when a woman is screaming in labor. Sweat is on her face. Hair is stuck to her neck. Hands are gripped to the bed frame. The midwife washes her hands, warms a cloth, checks the mother's breathing. She gives orders to the women in the room. She might send a man to fetch more water or a child to heat stones. She makes decisions quickly. If the birth goes well, families thank her. If the mother bleeds, if the child is stillborn, if an infection follows, grief looks for a cause. In communities that already accept witchcraft as a working explanation, suspicion may fall on the one who touched the body and gave the orders. The midwife also knows the plants that affect the body, and this knowledge breeds further fear. Courts and clergy often interpret female control over reproduction as something dangerous. The broom again becomes the symbol linking the woman to the home and to the private acts that men want to regulate. A prosecutor can describe the broom as a tool of domestic order, and then transform it into a tool of domestic sabotage. The same prosecutor may claim the woman used the broom to travel to secret meetings. This story makes her sound organized and predatory. It turns her practical work into a conspiracy. Property disputes push toward the same model. A widow who inherits land or a house becomes an object of interest. Neighbors watch her decisions, officials watch her payments, relatives watch her boundaries. A widow might refuse to remarry, take in a lodger, or rent out part of her land. She might sell goods at the market. These actions can cause resentment because they defy expectations. If she is sharp-tongued, if she refuses alms, if she demands what she is owed, she becomes easier to cast as malicious. People who owe her money want her silenced. People competing with her want her weakened. When misfortune strikes a sick child, a crop failure, a dead pig, a rumor can arise. It spreads fast because it serves interests. The broom leaning against her door becomes a convenient detail. It allows a witness to describe her in one simple sentence. She stood there with her broom. She watched me. She muttered. She went away. This detail becomes something a court clerk can write down, and once written, the detail acquires the authority of fact. These accusations take shape through specific acts in specific places. A woman asks for milk, a neighbor refuses, the woman leaves angry. A week later, the neighbor's cow stops giving milk. The neighbor thinks of the quarrel and asks others if they have had trouble. Someone points to the angry woman. The neighbor retells the story, and this time the story includes more detail. The woman stood at my threshold. She held a broom. She looked past me into the house. The neighbor repeats the story to a local official. The official asks questions and suggests answers. The official wants the story to fit the known template: the curse, the quarrel, the mark, the meeting. The broom slips into the case because it is in the same domestic space where the quarrel began. Once the case reaches court, the broom becomes part of a larger set of symbols used to depict the accused as a breaker of order and a threat. The woman's voice becomes evidence against her. Her anger becomes evidence. Her poverty becomes evidence. Her independence becomes evidence. Men also face accusations of witchcraft. Nevertheless, the image of the broom rider remains tethered to women because, in the collective consciousness, the broom is bonded to female labor. This link makes the story of the broom rider useful in sermons about proper behavior. A preacher can stand in a church and describe a woman who should have remained at her hearth, but instead rides out at night. He can link this to sin, sexuality, disobedience, and the breakdown of domestic discipline. Listeners carry this message into daily interactions. They watch women's behavior more closely. They interpret disagreements as threats. The broom becomes a warning sign. It is a short step from saying a woman keeps a dirty house to saying she keeps a dangerous house. It is a short step from saying she sweeps at a strange time to saying she sweeps blessings out of other homes. This chapter also belongs to a period of religious conflict that changes how communities speak of magic. As Protestant reform spread and Catholic authorities react, both sides emphasize discipline, purity, and clear boundaries between acceptable and forbidden practices. Old folk customs that once lived comfortably alongside church life become targets. People who once used charms or verbal blessings at home find these habits attracting scrutiny. Women often preserve these customs because they manage birth, illness, and death within the home. A charm whispered over a child with a fever becomes suspicious under new religious pressure. A bundle of herbs hung near the door becomes suspicious. A broom used in a house cleansing ritual becomes suspicious. Officials interpret these domestic acts as evidence of spiritual rebellion. The legend of the broom rider is advantageous because it offers a clear and frightening picture of how the home turns against the church. A woman uses a domestic tool to break the rules that the clergy declares divine. This story fits the needs of institutions trying to impose a uniform faith. Then the story crosses the Atlantic with people who carry fear as part of their baggage. A ship leaves an English port and enters a churning sea. The deck is packed with barrels, ropes, and bundles in cloth. Families huddle under canvas. A woman clutches the rail during the tossing. She has a small broom because one is needed by everyone in the cramped cabins. People sweep up spilled grain, mud tracked from the deck, ash from a small cooking fire. The broom stays nearby because space is scarce. These travelers bring more than just tools. They bring the sermons they heard, the pamphlets they read, and the stories they shared in the dark. They bring a legal imagination shaped by European witch hunts. When they land in New England, they build towns where the church and the court overlap. They build a culture where neighbors watch neighbors as part of religious duty. In such places, private conflicts quickly become public. In a Puritan household, domestic order becomes a moral issue. Floors are swept, beds are made, Children are forced to be silent during prayer. A wife who fails to maintain order risks criticism that goes beyond untidiness. The criticism concerns the salvation of the soul, reputation, and the husband standing in the church. Women carry the burden of these expectations, and women carry the guilt when the household fails. This burden becomes heavier when the community faces threats, harsh winters, crop failures, diseases, raids, and political uncertainty. People sleep with muskets at hand. They bury children in frozen ground. They watch their supplies dwindle. Under such pressure, fear finds targets in familiar places among people who have few defenders. Those who argue, those who beg, those who refuse to submit. The women accused in New England often fit the patterns familiar from Europe. Poverty, isolation, quarrels, and a reputation shaped by rumor. The crisis in Salem in 1692 makes this dynamic starkly clear. A group of young girls exhibit strange behavior. Convulsions, screaming, complaints of pinching and biting, claims of visions. Ministers and magistrates interpret these claims as evidence of witchcraft. The legal system accepts testimony of invisible harm and invisible presences. Accusations spread fast. People name neighbors. Neighbors name others. The jail overflows. Interrogations demand that suspects explain how they caused harm and how they met with other witches. Some confess, some refuse. Confession, in some cases, can save a life because authorities focus on the unrepentant as the most dangerous. Confession also feeds the story. A confessor provides details about meetings, animals, and travels because the interrogators expect these details. European law, including the flight on a broom, exists in the background even when specific testimony focuses on other elements. The cultural image of witches traveling at night and gathering secretly helps judges and priests explain what is happening. It helps them claim that a coordinated enemy is acting within the community. The broom rider remains part of this large mental picture. Even if the broom is not mentioned in the record, the broom also returns here as a symbol of a woman's domestic identity. A woman accused in New England is still the one who sweeps the floor, watches the hearth, keeps food from spoiling, washes the linen, delivers babies, and sits at a sick. When she is accused, the story turns her domestic role into a mask. Witnesses claim she came to their bedside at night. Witnesses claim she entered their house without opening the door. Witnesses claim she left marks. The domestic sphere becomes a battlefield in the minds of the community. The broom, already linked to the threshold and the hearth, becomes another piece of this mental equipment. Even when people do not say the word broom aloud, they imagine the witch moving easily through domestic space, because they already associate witches with women, and women with domestic tools. Authorities use written reports and sermons to frame these crises, and these texts circulate. They link the fears of New England with European fears. They reinforce the idea that witches form networks. They reinforce the idea that witches travel at night. They reinforce the idea that female bodies and female habits can hide secret sin. Through these channels, the image of the broom rider stays alive. It survives because it remains useful in moral teaching and in folk art. After the Salem executions stop and doubts grow, the images remain. The community may reject the court's actions while keeping the mental image of the witch. The image offers a way to talk about chaos, social conflict, and the fear of women who speak and act outside expected roles. In Europe, skepticism in some circles grows in the late 17th and 18th centuries. Some courts demand more convincing evidence. Some elites begin to feel uneasy about former extremes. Nevertheless, the image of the broom rider continues to live in mass culture because it has become a shorthand. It conveys a category of person in a single stroke. It also allows for humor. In a tavern, they might tell a story about a neighbor on a broom and laugh, while still reinforcing the idea that certain women are dangerous. Humor sharpens the cruelty because it makes the accusation seem like a game, until it turns into a death sentence. Women feel this in daily life. They learn to manage their anger in public. They learn to avoid quarrels with influential neighbors. They learn to accept poor treatment to avoid suspicion. They learn to keep quiet about their knowledge of herbs. They learn to hide their small rituals. The broom remains at the door, and it becomes a reminder that the slightest domestic detail can be turned into a weapon. A police constable stands at the edge of a fairground and watches a man selling pamphlets from a wooden tray. The seller speaks loudly and confidently. He tells the crowd of a witch who rode out at night. He describes the broom. He describes the meeting. He describes the confession. People lean closer, then pull back and laugh, as if they had heard the story before. The constable knows the mood has changed. A century earlier, a magistrate might have ordered an arrest based on the same claims. In this fairground, the claims are taken as entertainment. The seller counts the coins and keeps talking because the crowd keeps buying. A small boy holds a pamphlet with both hands and studies the crude picture on the cover. A woman with long hair sitting on a broom over a roof. The lines are rough. The image is still read instantly. It doesn't need a careful reading. The boy folds the paper and hides it under his jacket, as if it was something important. In courtrooms across Europe and in the American colonies, the legal appetite for witchcraft cases eventually shrinks, and the change starts with practical steps. Judges begin to demand clearer evidence. Priests argue with each other about visions and dreams. Officials worry about disorder when accusations spread too wide and begin to touch influential families. A town that executes too many people loses its labor force, loses its stability, and invites a backlash. Some communities reach a point where they look at the ruins and decide they have had enough. A few judges refuse to accept spectral claims. A few juries refuse to return guilty verdicts. A few officials reclassify accusations from witchcraft to fraud or disturbing the peace. When someone claims magical powers, the shift does not happen as a sharp break. It manifests as a hesitation, as a delayed warrant, as a clerk who writes less, as a magistrate who prefers a fine to a hanging. For the accused, this difference means life. A woman who once would have been marched to a stake or a gallows walks out of a cell and returns home with a ruined reputation and a body weakened by imprisonment. She still needs to sweep the floor. She still needs to face her neighbors. She still needs to live with the knowledge that the same village could turn against her again. If fear rises, as official persecutions fade away, the figure of the witch transitions into culture in a new way, and the broom follows because it already possesses a distinct silhouette. The broom works in sketches, in quick carvings, in theatrical props, and later in photography and film. It informs the viewer in a single second exactly which character they are looking at. Artists wishing to sell prints continue to use the broom because customers recognize it. Theatre troupes continue to use it because it is clearly visible from the back row. Humorous writers continue to use it because it provides the audience with a familiar joke. The broom becomes an instrument of shorthand, and shorthand survives even after people stop believing in the story as a whole. This survival also suits the authorities. The state can reject witch trials, yet allow the mockery of witches on stage. Mockery helps society distance itself from recent violence. It gives people a way to treat an old fear as foolishness, which saves face for families that once participated in accusations. It also displaces the pain of former victims from the public consciousness, because laughter allows one to move on without accountability. Domestic life changes in the 18th and 19th centuries, and these changes shift the broom's place in the home and the imagination. Urban households grow. City streets fill with soot and grime from horses, carts, and factories. Cleaning becomes constant work. Brooms become more standardized as manufacturers produce them in large quantities. A broom in a shop window becomes a common sight. A woman carrying a broom becomes a common sight. At the same time, popular media expands. Cheap prints, satirical caricatures, and later magazines circulate widely. A cartoonist might draw a politician as a witch to hint at deception or corruption. and the audience understands the insult because the broom makes the meaning instantaneous. A cartoonist might draw a grumbling elderly woman as a witch for a cheap laugh, and the audience understands the joke because elderly women have long carried the stereotype of the dangerous neighbor. These images do not need court records. They rely on the memory of old stories, discarding the legal consequences. The witch becomes a mask that people use in arguments about power and gender, and the broom becomes the object that makes the mask readable. Halloween traditions expand and change in the 19th and 20th centuries, especially in places where immigrant communities bring old seasonal customs and mix them with new commercial habits. Families carve vegetables and later pumpkins. Children put on costumes and knock on doors. Shopkeepers decorate windows to attract buyers. The silhouette of a witch becomes a practical decoration because it can be cut out of paper and taped to glass. It can be printed on a poster. It can be drawn on a sign. The broom gives the silhouette its most characteristic line. The hat and the broom tell the whole story, even when the face remains blank. This simplicity causes the broom-riding witch to spread through neighborhoods in a way that more complex images cannot. Once it becomes a seasonal decoration, it becomes part of childhood memory. A child sees it in October, year after year, and the association is fixed before the child learns anything about the historical deaths that created the image. Early cinema and stage entertainments fixed the broom-riding witch in a new form. Costume designers use long skirts, pointed hats, and exaggerated noses because these shapes read well from the stage and screen. They add the broom because it gives the actor something to hold onto and something to straddle. It turns a static costume into action. An actor can toss a broom over their shoulder, stomp across the stage, and provoke laughter. An actor can sit on it and be lifted by wires, eliciting gasps of delight. The broom becomes part of the theatrical equipment as much as a symbol. When movie studios create fantasy stories, they use the same signals because viewers already recognize them. In the late 1930s, audiences see a green-skinned witch appearing on the screen in a major film, and the image of the broom rider becomes part of mass entertainment for generations. The voice, costume, and posture of the character leave a deep mark. People leave the cinema discussing the witch because she feels alive, and because the broom gives her a clear physical connection to the world. She does not hover like a ghost. She rides like a human using an object, which makes the fantasy tangible. Throughout the 20th century, television and advertising keep the broom-riding witch in constant circulation. A cartoon can draw a witch on a broom in one frame and move on. A cereal box can show a witch stirring a cauldron and leaning on a broom. A Halloween candy wrapper can print the silhouette over and over. Children absorb the image through repetition. Adults use it as a seasonal signal. The broom becomes part of the visual language of autumn in many places. This creates a strange divide. The broom-riding witch becomes cute in some contexts and threatening in others. A children's cartoon endows her with a silly laugh and a clumsy landing. A horror movie poster gives her sharp teeth and a dark sky. Both versions use the same broom because the broom provides instant recognition. The object does not care which story it serves. It remains stable while the tone around it changes. During these same decades, real people begin to reclaim the word witch for spiritual practice, for identity, and for political statements. Some build new religious movements rooted in old folklore and ritual ideas. Some practice folk magic within families and pass it quietly from one person to another. Some draw inspiration from pre-Christian traditions, seasonal festivals, and nature-based spirituality. In these communities, the broom returns as a domestic tool with ritual use. People make their own brooms from birch, straw, or other materials. They bind them with cord. They hang them near doors. They use them in simple cleansing rituals that involve sweeping a room before a ceremony, or sweeping at the threshold as a symbolic act. These practices remain physical. A person moves the broom across the floor. A person tidies the space. A person marks the beginning of a gathering with cleaning. The broom also appears in wedding customs where couples jump the broom to mark a marriage. with a public and memorable act. The jump is literal. Feet rise and land. Friends clap. Photographs capture the moment. The broom gains meaning because it connects domestic life, labor, and a chosen ritual identity. This return creates a second split in the meaning of the broom. In popular entertainment, the broom often signals a female villain or a comic outsider. In modern spiritual communities, the broom can signal belonging and practice. The public may not see the difference because the same object is at the center. Nevertheless, the behavior around it changes. A person identifying as a witch today might own a broom that never leaves the floor, and they might also enjoy the old image of flight as a symbol of freedom. Another person might reject the image of flight while still keeping the broom as a tool for cleaning and ceremony. These choices play out in ordinary spaces: apartments, backyards, small gatherings, bookstores, and community centers. People speak about this in simple language. They describe what they do and why they do it. They also speak about history with anger, because the old accusations killed people. The broom carries this tension because it is at the center of both the violence and the subsequent reclamation of meanings. Museums, historians, and educators add another layer by returning to the records and explaining how the image was formed. They point to court protocols, to prints, to sermons, to pamphlets, to the social pressures that caused accusations to spread. They describe torture and coercion. They describe how judges and clergy shaped confessions. They describe how fear of poison and medical ignorance turned herbal knowledge into suspicion. They describe how domestic objects became legal evidence. This work changes the way some people look at the broom-riding witch, especially adults who learn about the scale of the violence for the first time. A person who once saw the broom-riding witch as a harmless decoration reads testimony about women executed after forced confessions and begins to see the image differently. They may still decorate their house for Halloween. They may still enjoy fantasy stories, but they also carry a sharper awareness that the image grew out of real pain. This awareness does not erase the icon. It adds weight to it in the mind and changes how some people tell this story to their children. The broom survives as a central prop because it ties together key elements that have always driven the myth. It connects witchcraft with women and the home. It connects witchcraft with movement and travel. It connects witchcraft with secrecy, because a broom can stand in plain sight without causing alarm. It also connects witchcraft with play, because children naturally treat long sticks as things to gallop on. This connection to play is more significant than people realize. A child running across a yard astride a broom internalizes the physical posture of the icon. Before learning any theology or history, the posture is built into the body. Later, when that child sees a witch in a cartoon, they recognize the pose and laugh. This bodily recognition keeps the icon alive through generations without any need for belief. A costume shop in late October gives a clear view of how the image functions in the present. Plastic brooms hang on hooks next to hats and capes. Some brooms disassemble into 3 parts for ease of packaging. Some have glitter on the handle. Others have orange straw. A customer picks one up and swings it in the air to check the weight. The customer smiles because it feels like a prop, light and simple. In the same store's household department, in another part of town, sturdy domestic brooms intended for kitchens and sidewalks are sold. A customer grips the wooden handle and checks the bristles for stiffness. This customer is thinking about dirt, not witches. Both brooms have the same basic shape. Context changes their meaning. The shape remains constant because it works. The broom looks like a tool and a vehicle simultaneously. This dual identity makes it useful for stories. At a modern Halloween parade, a woman in a witch costume walks down the main street. She carries a broom on her shoulder. Children wave their hands. A marching band plays. A volunteer hands out candy. The woman smiles and keeps walking. A few spectators take photos. The scene remains bright and ordinary. Behind this scene stands a long history of accusations, forced confessions, and executions that originally created this icon. Most spectators do not think of trials or burnings while they clap their hands. The paid still depends on the very object that once appeared in court records as evidence of criminal flight. The object has moved from the category of evidence to the category of scenery. It has passed from terror to play. It has passed from persecution to profit. The broom survives any change of era because it remains easy to recognize and easy to use.